All right, so welcome to this event. My name's Tim. I'm the Postgraduate Liaison Officer for the British Association of Applied Linguistics, and we wanted to put together this event because I think going to conferences can be a super valuable thing, and I think we're all going to share some of our experiences of going to conferences and stuff in the future. And I've got a talk coming up soon where I'll talk a bit about that as well. I think it can be really valuable, but I also think it can be a really scary thing. And if I can remember the very first conference I ever applied to present at, I was very lucky because the person who was running this conference basically got back to me and said, this is not how you write a conference abstract at all. And please structure it like this and I'll let you resubmit it again. Like, I know you're new to the country and blah, blah. This was years and years ago in South Korea. And so he was super friendly and kind of really helpful at helping me to get accepted for the first time and sort of giving me some tips and stuff as well. But I think without that, if I might have not gone to that first conference and then I might not have ended up here today. So hopefully we've got a lot of knowledge and maybe some wisdom as well in the room. So I'm Tim, I'm a regular conference goer. I'm also a PhD student at the University College London, and hopefully in the final stages. We're also joined by Glenn, who is another one of the BAL exec and is very involved in sort of meetings and conferences and things like that, and is an expert. Alex is here as well. I must have invited Alex. I really wanted to not just kind of have people with lots and lots of, well, not lots of experience, but kind of people who've been doing conference stuff for a really long time. I wanted to have another postgraduate student here, and Alex is, I think, one of the best presenters I've seen out of postgraduate students and non-postgraduate students. And I think if you compare my slides to his, you'll probably see that quite well later as well. Like I've seen a preview, it looks really good. So we've got a lot to learn from him. And then we also have Zhuhua, who's the former chair of BAL, and so she has a really good idea of just networking at conferences and things like that. So Glenn's going to talk a bit about getting accepted for the conference, because that's sort of the first step. And then Alex is going to talk a bit about making that conference talk great. I'm going to talk a bit about sort of maximizing your conference experience. And then Shuhai is going to talk about networking at a conference, because that's another really important thing. We've got quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So please drop some questions in this chat. I'm going to try and keep an eye on them. And yeah, I will sort of, I'll make a note and then we can kind of ask our panel things like that, because we want to make it as useful for you as possible. So I'm going to hand over to Glenn in a second, but just to remind people that we are recording the session, so please just keep that in mind, because we want to use this as sort of a resource for future presentations and things as well. So without any further ado, shall I hand over to Glenn and we can get started?
Okay, thank you, Tim. I guess people can see me and hear me. Let's share my one. I've only got one slide, so let's see if I can at least share one slide. Okay, can you see one slide? Right.
Perfect, yeah, thank you.
I thought, to be honest, it was almost starting off a bit lazy, just thinking, I'll just get everything on one slide and get straight to the point. I'll start off. Yeah, I'm Glenn Hedikin. I'm the faculty director for postgraduate research in our humanities faculty at the University of Portsmouth. And I'm the meeting secretary, so sort of leaning on all the conferences over the next 4 or 5 years to make sure we have all our BAL conferences in place. As I said, I just started off thinking, oh, let's just try to see if I can get everything on one slide so that there's not too much hassle. But I think it's turned out to be a really good thing, because it gives me a chance to really talk about the iterative process of preparing your talk and what you think you want to say. You might think it's a little strange or notable that writing your abstract is near the bottom of my slide and like one of the last things that I'm going to say. And again, that's the sort of reflecting on the sort of iterative process about thinking, Where do you want to go to a conference? Who's the audience? What's the point of going? What are your objectives? All these sort of background questions can come into your mind when you're writing your draft abstract. Then you can go back and think about these questions to keep this sort of cyclical nature of preparing your abstract. So if we just think at the beginning, you've got to choose your conference and think about where you'd like to go, why you're going to go. I noticed some of you do say you've got a conference coming up next week or the next couple of weeks, but if you hadn't already thought about that, if this is your first time thinking, yes, maybe I'd like to do a conference, you're probably not going to get a conference proposal accepted ready for next week. It's often things that are 6, 7, or 8 months down the line. So you've got to think very carefully about which is the conference that you're going to go to, what are the appropriate dates when you have to submit your abstract. Think about when you're getting accepted. You might need to organize a visa and do your travel. If we consider the BAL 25 conference, of course, that many of you may be thinking about, you could be writing your abstract today and potentially talking about that subject on the 4th of September. So think what 6 months is like. I was just spelling out. We've got April, May, June, July, August, coming up to the early days of September. It almost sounds on paper, you're like, oh my, that's never going to come. You've got months and months and months of work. But if you've got, oh, it's okay, I'll relax. I'll write my, I'll do my results in May. I'll finish this off in June. That time is going to fly past like the fastest time period you've ever imagined. And you're going to suddenly find yourself being a bit flustered during the talk. So try to make sure, be realistic about what you can do in these 6 months. Mostly just talk about what you've already done. Maybe give yourself a little bit space to finish off a couple of results over the next 6 months. The other presenters are going to be reflecting on sort of who you can talk to, what you can get out of a conference, what are your networking opportunities. So that could be something really important. I've been to other talks. I used to live in South Korea as well. When I teach in English in Korea, I've been to lots of talks as a sort of a junior audience member in Korea, and I flew back into England, started my PhD. The first time I got to a BAL conference, I think somebody had said, go to a conference with a really clear objective. And I thought, right, I'm going to go, my first BAL conference, I'm going to get onto the BAL executive, stand for a lecture and try to get onto the BAL executive. And I did that on my first BAL conference. So I suppose it won't always work out like that, but it's useful to think, I want to meet this person. I want to talk. I want to have a decent talk. I want to maybe make 2 or 3 new contacts. Think about what you want to get out of it. This, of course, connects to who is going to go, the type of people that you're going, of course. You may be thinking about a type of conference that will have lots of qualitative research, lots of quantitative research. Perhaps there's a type of conference that tends to assume that everybody's going to be a language teacher, or a conference that has a much broader interpretation of applied linguistics. So this kind of connects for why are you going? Who is going to go? Who do you think might be in your audience? Remember, you may have just about, if you're a fairly junior speaker, if there's a lot of parallel sessions and you're not a well-known speaker, you might have 4 people in the audience. You might have 40 people in the audience. So you're sort of thinking about what would your pitch if it's a very small, cozy audience with a couple of your close friends compared to a room full of people that you don't know who they are and you're having to pitch these different types of message to different audiences. For number 5 here, what's happened in previous years about learning about the conference atmosphere. I think there's very often a theme about local challenges, the future of applied linguistics, what are changing methods, what is the effect of AI. So think about what the theme is. I think what was last year's theme? What was the theme a couple of years ago? You can learn about what's the conference atmosphere from the themes. So yeah, that's number 7 here, conference themes. Leading on number 8, our BAL theme this September is in the face, there's a word missing there, I'm covering up, in the face, I think, of global challenges and local needs. So you may want to sketch out what's your rough plan, what's your research, and then think, how does this research map onto the theme? Is it a very close fit? There's a little bit of tweaking needed. I would strongly recommend you to say something about the theme particularly if it's a BAL, well, I think for a BAL conference, almost for every conference, when we're reviewing, you might, if you've got two similar papers, you might give a score of 4. If something's really good paper that doesn't connect so well, you might give a score of 5 to somebody who's got a really good paper and also a strong fit. And that could make a small difference between you getting into the conference or not getting into the conference. Of course, your whole paper, you don't need to have 10 minutes about local issues and 10 minutes about global issues. It's never going to be like a perfect fit, like a Lego brick. You may be just thinking about, oh, here's an example of how my work relates to global issues. Here's a sample of how my work relates to the local. It might just be a snippet that touches on the theme. So you can be a little bit creative, perhaps. Eventually, yeah, you're going to write the abstract. So again, go back, reflect on all these points. Think about what's the reason you're doing it. Are you thinking to talk about the social effects? Are you drawing in stakeholders? Are you trying to sort of impress people to maybe think about connections? That you might want to write a paper with them. You might want to draw people on to future projects to come and connect with you. So think about who the audience is, write down your subject. And the last point, just again, you've got this 6-month lead in. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to talk about all these wonderful results. Just trust me, everything's going to be fantastic, and leave a sort of woolly abstract. You've got to have something really meaningful in the abstract. What's a clear context? What's your method? What are some early results? How does it link to the theme? Don't promise the world. Don't assume that you're going to be able to change the world in 6 months, because that time is going to fly past too quickly. And if you've not got really, really solid results, you could probably do something in the next couple of days, like a pilot study or a small sample, so that you can say, oh, here's my pilot study, or here's a sample of the results. So there's something, the person doing the reviewing can say, yes, there is some results in the abstract. Don't leave it woolly, and don't just say, oh, trust us, leave it for the future, because we're not going to trust you. There's too many people will run out of time and they won't have things to say. So those are the general points, I think, with all the context, the timing, and the running up to writing out a good abstract. And I will hand over to Alex.
All right, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm a PhD student from Ghent University and the University of the Western Cape, which is respectively in Belgium and in South Africa. And I'll be presenting on how to give a conference presentation. Let me just share my slides. Is this visible for everyone? It is. All right. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the presentation, which I have titled Make It Stick, giving a great conference presentation. I want to start with a bit of a disclaimer, explaining what right I have or maybe don't have to make some of the claims that I'm going to be making throughout this presentation. Like I said, like most of you in the audience, I am a PhD student. In fact, I'm 3 days away from submitting my dissertation. Over the course of that PhD, I have given over 25 presentations, most of those at various national and international conferences, including the last 3 BAL annual conferences. I've also been teaching presentation skills to the graduate and undergraduate students at Ghent University. And as such, today's presentation is, there's a bit of personal preference in there. I think we all have pet peeves when it comes to presentations, and Tim was kind enough to give me a platform to share those. But I think most of it is evidence-informed, research-based best practices. And I wanted to give you 5 takeaways, 5 practical pieces of advice for you to work with for your first conference presentation. And the first one is to take the audience by the hand. You see, when you go to a big international conference, you're going to be watching dozens of presentations, which is a lot of information for you to process and to go through. And it's generally quite appreciated if a presenter takes the audience carefully through the narrative. And I think the first way of doing this is by selecting the right focus for your presentation. When you're starting a PhD, you start with a broad research topic, But in order for you to be able to somewhat exhaustively and conclusively say something about this topic in 20 minutes, you need to boil it down, you need to narrow it down and delineate it to a research problem. If you do this, that can be, one aspect of one study of the various studies that make up your PhD project, for example. When you have a focus, you want to present it in a coherent and well-structured presentation, which means that, like the abstract, as Glenn just said, you want to have an introduction which is, general to specific. You start out with the state of the art, you represent the literature, and from there you identify the gaps in knowledge that you will be appealing to. From there, you can deduce your research objectives, which include your research questions, and if you have any hypotheses and reasons for those hypotheses, and then you go into the methodology. About the methodology, and I talked to Tim, I know this is one of his pet peeves, keep it succinct. You don't have to go into, the utmost level of detail in your 20-minute presentation. Give people the information that they need to interpret your results, and if there are any further questions, well, that's what the Q&A is for. Then present your results, presenting them first before interpreting them, and then you go into the discussion and the conclusion, which is specific to general. You start with your specific findings, you answer your research questions, and then you formulate any broader takeaways if you have those. It's not only important that your presentation is well structured, it also needs to be cohesive in terms of the story that you actually tell on the day itself, which means that you're going to need to use linking words between your various sentences, but also on a larger scale, you want to think about having formal transitions between the various parts of your presentation. Foreshadowing and referring to things you said before, also a good idea. Like Aristotle said, you want to tell your audience what it is that you're going to tell them, then you want to tell them, and at the end, you want to tell them what it is that you just told them. Make sure, make it stick, repeat yourself, and link everything well. One of my personal pet peeves is that I think people often leave their research questions and their takeaways too implicit, even though I think those are the anchoring points upon which the success of your presentation hinges. You want to put those research questions explicitly on a slide and do the same thing with your takeaways. Number them if necessary, but make sure that that part of your message does not get lost. Which brings me to my second rule or rule of thumb, which is KISS, or keep it simple and snappy. This refers both to your text. I always tell my students who are working on their research presentations that it appears to be an extraneous aspiration to desire overawing the audience using convoluted locution. In other words, your fancy speech doesn't impress anyone. In fact, you actually want to make sure that your spoken language doesn't resemble your academic writing language. I'm a social linguist. You can look at any one of my publications to see that I tend to fall into the trap of writing 60-word sentences with 4 subclauses and 4 uses of specific and particular. But I try to avoid that in my conference presentation because that's how your audience gets lost. Keep it accessible and use the jargon that is used in your particular subfield in linguistics. It doesn't just refer to the text, it also refers to your slides. With a bit of a wink to Marie Kondo here, I want to say, declutter your slides. Get rid of everything which is not essential, everything which does not spark joy. Research shows that the best or the proper amount of items on a slide is 6 or fewer. If you have more than 6 items on a slide, the time that people need to process that information drastically increases, which is when people kind of stop listening to the narrative that you're telling them. In spite of what we always tend to say, humans are not natural multitaskers, so don't make people do that during your presentation. The same applies to the number of ideas on a slide. You might have heard people say, oh, for a 20-minute presentation, you should have only 20 slides. I don't think the number of slides really is what matters. I think it is the amount of information that goes on one slide. Present your ideas on separate slides. Which brings me to my third rule of thumb, which is about the visuals. The visuals should be supporting and not distracting from what it is that you're trying to say. And unfortunately here, style somewhat matters. I have an example. This is Bill Gates giving one of the Microsoft keynotes. You can barely see him because he's getting washed out by his own PowerPoint presentation. Compare that to the competitors, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs, who has much more toned down and simple slides, which allow you to focus on the presenter rather than the presented. This effect becomes a lot more stark when you look at several slides in succession. Again, Microsoft keynote versus the Apple keynote. You can feel your eyes relaxing. Whatever style you use, whatever color scheme you feel comfortable with, make sure that your slides are not overly convoluted in terms of making them look nice. Keep it simple. We're there to hear the content, not to look at your slides. Avoid sentences on your slides. Again, research shows that people start reading, and when people start reading, people stop listening, with the exception, obviously, of direct quotes and data excerpts. And use contrast. Make sure that your slides are clearly legible, also from the final row in the theater, the lecturing hall where you might be presenting your slides. A final note is about the way in which you visualize your data. Try to do so in an effective way, and preferably, if you can do it, in a memorable way. Using an example of some of the slides that I've presented at BAL over these last couple of years, I like to build my visuals up as I'm presenting them, introducing information at the appropriate time rather than presenting everybody with the entire visual at once, because that amount of information might be a little bit overwhelming. Same thing when I use tables. I like to highlight the part of the table that I'm talking about at that specific moment, especially if it allows for some kind of contrastive analysis. In terms of your delivery, try to speak with impact, and speaking with impact requires preparation. One of the questions that my students often ask me is, should I be working with a text that I write out and then study by heart? A difficult point. Research is a little bit inconclusive, but it appears to indicate that if you struggle with a language barrier, if you don't like presenting in English, it might actually be a good idea to write a text out. If you don't struggle with a language barrier, you might want to stick to talking points, because you risk over-relying on the text and then having a blackout at the moment of your presentation. Use pauses, use them effectively, which means mainly when you introduce your data or data excerpts or your main findings, because you want to give people a moment to consider those. Also, slow your pace down. Everybody, and this includes me, always speaks a lot faster than they want to. Take a moment to breathe in your conference presentation. Don't just exhale at the end of 20 minutes. And then the final point, the end of your presentation, is the Q&A. It is potentially the best part of your presentation, but is the part that you need to prepare for, because you don't just want to survive the Q&A, you want to actively thrive. A couple of quick tips about the Q&A. First of all, it's not an oral exam, so you don't need to know everything. Saying I don't know to a particularly difficult question is something that most of us have done before. If you don't understand a question, if you're not sure whether you got it entirely right, if you need an alternative formulation, repeat the question. It also buys you some time to then formulate your answer. You can try and control the Q&A if the conference format allows for it by suggesting a couple of questions for the discussion. This is particularly useful because, you're in a room full of experts and you might want to get the most out of the experience. If there's particular aspects of your analysis that you're struggling with, formulate that as a question at the beginning of the Q&A. Reference slides are good for those people who are nervous with regards to the unprepared nature of the Q&A. So reference slides are slides that you prepare, but you don't use them in the actual presentation. They contain, for example, more data excerpts, more information about your methodology. And then when you get a question about that in your Q&A, you can use those reference slides to rely on in your answer. You can come out swinging, and I think it looks very professional. After the Q&A then, and this is something that we'll talk about later today as well, you might have noticed that there are certain people in the audience who have a lot of expert knowledge on the topic that you're working on. People might be working on something similar. Seek them out, and in the breaks, try to exchange contact information and build your professional network. I have found the BAL conferences to be particularly useful in that regard. So To summarize, take your audience by the hand and give a presentation that is focused, that is coherent and cohesive. Keep it simple and snappy, and this refers to both the text and the visuals that you rely on. Those visuals should support and not distract from the story that you're trying to tell. Your delivery, prepare well and speak with impact. And finally, try to maximize the Q&A. Try to make sure that you're well prepared and that you don't just survive that Q&A, but that you actually thrive. I think that was it for me, and I think it's over to Tim.
All right, thank you so much. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to share my much less good-looking slides that probably don't follow all of these principles. So just give me one. So can everyone see those? Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about making the most of conferences, and I'm also conferences have been a big part of my, I guess, academic life and professional development, and sort of journey more generally. I started out as an English language teacher in South Korea, and like many people I used to meet in South Korea, at least, who are English language teachers there, I went to do it for 1 year, and then sort of, 12, 13 years on, I'm now confused how I ended up where I am now, doing a PhD in applied linguistics. But going to conferences was one of the really big things that kind of helped me fall in love with linguistics as a subject, and not just think, oh, well, I've got this 1 year job or this 1 year gig. And actually, I felt quite embarrassed a lot of the time as a first year teacher, because I really didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know much about my subject. And I couldn't really find a lot of easy ways to help improve my practice. So I started going to conferences, because there's quite a good conference scene out there. And I started making connections, and I started learning about all these interesting ideas, and meeting people and sort of making friends for life, and all of these things. So so I've been to, I have to go through and count, but like tens and tens and tens of conferences. And I think generally, like they've been such a positive impact on my life and really helped me develop professionally. And they're really something to kind of look forward to, especially if they're at a nice time of year in a nice place, and you can travel and see people you've not seen in a long time as well. So in this talk, I'm just going to talk a bit. It's quite general, because I think everyone else has the very meaty talk. I'm just going to talk about some things that might sort of fall between the gaps of the other presentations, I guess, and hopefully there'll be something useful that I've just kind of picked up from my experience going to conferences. So the first thing I wanted to say is, like, well, why should you go to a conference? And I think especially for like postgraduate students, it's really good to be able to test out your ideas. And so I've got this picture here. This is a picture. It doesn't look like Belfast very much. One of the sad things about going to conferences, you can't really tell where you are just by looking at the room. Often this could be UCL, this could be anywhere, but this is in Belfast. And we gave this talk at this conference in Belfast, and it was people got it was quite fiery. Like, we had quite a strong reaction, and we got loads of feedback on this talk. And I was so fired up after this. I don't know if I recommend this, but I decided I was going to take the train to Belfast. So you have to go to Northern Wales and then take a ferry, and then a train up from Dublin, from London. And so by the time I got back from the conference, I'd managed to write essentially the whole paper, which is now in a journal, like not just based on our talk, but especially based on the feedback we got from the talk. And I found it really, really valuable. So I think testing your ideas is one of the really good things you can do at a conference. And I think it's often, I will often try and bring something that's maybe a bit of a spicier version compared to what ends up in a paper. Like, try and bring something and really start some discussion and get things going a bit. Because if you write something down and it's too spicy, or however you want to describe it, it can it can be misinterpreted to things. But I think in person it's a bit easier to get that feedback in a less pressured way. So I find that really valuable. Another thing that's nice is just the ability to get your ideas out there. So I think a lot of people in applied linguistics, we end up working in quite fast-moving fields. And so it's good to be able to share your ideas before having to go through the process of kind of getting it published. I mean, we're trying to get this paper on AI published, but it's about a year out of date already at the moment. But I've given presentations on it, and so for those presentations, I was able to sort of get the ideas out there a little bit earlier. Obviously, another big advantage is being able to learn from other people's presentations, and so that's another really great reason to go to a conference. Usually they're organized into themes, so you can kind of find a room which is all on a theme that you're interested in, and you can kind of stay there and really get to know those people. Making connections and friends is very important as well. And I think like you often end up with people you mostly just see them at the conference, to be honest. I also have people who are at the same university as me, but I only ever seem to see them at conferences. So it's nice to be able to catch up with people like that. And then it also looks really good on your CV if you've got some conference presentations behind you as well, because especially for sort of lectureship type jobs, people are looking for someone who can present their ideas well. And so if you can say, oh, well, I've presented at this conference, then hopefully it's evidence of that. And hopefully maybe you've made a good impression on people, and they kind of know that you can give a good presentation because they've seen you at the conference. So I think there's a lot to gain, and it can be a really fun thing. Okay, so another thing I think it's tricky is kind of affording going to conferences, because it really depends. Like some people have, maybe they've got lots of savings, or they have a lot of financial support. And so I do want to say that there are ways to kind of, if you haven't got that, like don't necessarily think, oh, it's impossible for me to go to a conference, because sometimes you just see the sticker price and think, oh my goodness, I can't do this. So one thing to keep an eye out for is sort of student pricing, because most conferences will have a discount for students, and often it can be quite substantial. So that's something to definitely check out. And then I think sometimes they'll have like extra funding. So if people are coming over to a conference from a developing country, or it'll be defined by different ways in different conferences, there might be additional funding or opportunities to pay less for your registration because of that. Another thing to look for is whether your university has funding. And so I think, at least in the UK, it seems like a lot of universities do have funding. I know for us at UCL, we have, I think it's £1,000 to use for the whole of your university experience. Sometimes that doesn't get you to too many conferences, but it can get you to some. And something I was told like very recently, I didn't realize this for a really long time, despite having been to lots of conferences, is if you've applied for conference funding through your university, you can put this on your CV or your cover letters, anything like that, as has successfully applied for funding. And obviously it's not as good as getting an ESRC grant or something, but for a PhD student, like it's actually good to say, like, I can successfully apply for funding. And my supervisor told me this in a very sort of, and obviously you'll add this to your CV. And I was like, what do you mean? And he explained it to me, and I thought, oh right, okay, this is something I have to explain when we give this talk, because I think people often don't realize. I don't know if everyone puts that on there, but it definitely does look like that. Also, like if it's really like if it's really going to be a problem to afford it, see if the conference has funding. I know BAL does, and I think most big conferences do. And so do check the website and kind of go into a bit of detail and see if the conference has funding. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think, well, especially at people getting around the UK, the train is the most common way to get around the UK. Get train tickets early, because we have a very weird train pricing system that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me all the time. Look into rail cards as well. That should be on the slide, because I think people often don't know this. There's kind of a lot of things you pick up over time living in the UK, but if you're just visiting the UK for a conference, you might not realize that actually often buying a rail card will save you more money in like with one ticket than it would be to buy the ticket without the rail card, because you can save about a third. And also trains, if you're buying the train 3 months before you travel, it's a lot cheaper than buying it the day before you travel. Do check the terms and conditions on those as well, because sometimes they could be quite strict, but it's a good thing to keep an eye out for, is kind of buying tickets early and really planning ahead of time. So hopefully that will give people an idea of maybe we can make these conferences a bit more affordable to attend. Okay, and then, oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Second. Okay, and then I just wanted to talk a little bit about some conference mistakes. Like I say, there's a lot of things I think maybe don't fall through the gaps. Some of these are conference mistakes I still make, so please do as I say, not as I do, because I'm terrible at some of these habits. So I think it's really important to plan ahead, because like especially bigger conferences, you'll have many rooms going on at the same time, and I think sometimes when you go to a conference, you'll see people, they seem to spend half their time reading the conference booklet, trying to figure out where they're going to go next, and then they miss the presentation they're currently in, and then I'm sure they go to the next presentation, which they spent half the last presentation deciding to go to, and in that presentation they're also looking at the conference booklet and deciding where to go next. And so I don't know if they really get as much from the conference. So there's often like a lot of slack time when you're at a conference. So I mean, often I'll just kind of print out the booklet or print out the timetable and look at it on the train up there. I know lots of people who are much more organized than me who will kind of have a plan with a highlighter, maybe 1 week in advance of the conference. I'm not quite there yet, but I aspire to be. But planning ahead can make a big difference, because you really want to be organized and get the most from it. And it's awful to realize that you missed a really good talk as well. Like sometimes someone will say, oh, did you see the talk about such and such? Like, I thought you'd be there because it's really your area and it would be so useful for you. And I thought, oh, I had no idea it was on. So planning ahead can really make a difference. Another thing I think is, I mean, it's definitely a temptation, because it can be very tiring going to conferences sometimes. But if you have a good turnout from your university, that can be great, because it's a very good network of people and you don't have to feel lonely at this conference or like you don't have anyone to talk to. But I think only talking to people you came with can also be a problem, and you kind of just see the same people kind of sitting together, and it's nice and you get to catch up with those people. But there's often like a lot of people from other universities or kind of other countries who have like knowledge you can gain from. So I'd really encourage people to sort of put themselves out there and kind of chat to as many people as possible and make a lot of connections. Another thing, and I think this is one I did the first like few years of going to conferences, is feeling like, oh, I've paid for this conference, or I think especially if it's like, oh, well, someone's paying for me to go to this conference, like my university's paying for me, I better go to every session and make the most out of everything. And this is a surefire way to come back from a conference completely burnt out and not ready to do anything. And you want to come back from a conference feeling very sort of energized and ready to do lots of things. Like, it's really hard work being at a conference and going to talks and listening to talks. And so like, feel free to just, you know, take a session off, and I'll often just go for a walk around the campus. Like, if I feel like I'll say my social battery is very depleted sometimes, so I just go for a walk around the campus, and often they have really nice campuses and you can kind of just enjoy that for a bit. Like, don't feel like you have to be at every single time slot 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. every day. Like, it's a recipe for exhaustion. And feel free to just kind of grab a coffee with people and hang out. I think a lot of the best connections at conferences come from that. And actually, often a lot of the best knowledge sharing at conferences, ironically, it's not in the presentations, it's sort of in the hallway outside the presentations, and people are talking to each other who are like kind of experts in their field. I think me and Alex had a really long rant about translanguaging and EMI and all these things at the conference last year, and it was really productive. Like, it was one of the best well, not I say best presentation, best knowledge sharing activities I was involved in. We got really heated and missed a bunch of stuff, and it's fine. It was really worthwhile. It's one of my best memories of that conference. So it's good. Okay, and then I think following up with people after the conference can be a really good idea. Like, I mean, I don't think you have to send like an email like with your life story and stuff, but like, I'm not 100% sure where all the academic communication happens. I think a lot of people are on Blue Sky and LinkedIn now. I think a lot of people have sort of moved away from Twitter a bit. So if you can follow up with people on there, I always keep my conference booklet so I can go through and find all the people I've seen and sort of say, okay, I'll add this person on Blue Sky, I'll add this person on LinkedIn, wherever you can find them. That's always a really nice idea. And if there's something you could maybe work on together, like, it's a good idea to kind of do that, because you know, like, sometimes it's just nice to remind people you're there and you exist as well. So that can be quite useful. And then the last thing is, if you've given a presentation on something, like, I think it's really smart to turn it into a paper of some kind. I think often conference presentations make good sort of conceptual pieces, like these sort of 4,000 word type papers, or these 2,000-word type papers, because if they're good, they should have a nice tight focus, like Alex says, and they should be very sort of set up for success in that way, and they should have a very clear argument. And so I think if you can get that feedback and then you can turn it into a paper, that's a really good thing. So hopefully those are some useful tips about conference presenting for people, and also some useful things to maybe avoid doing. I think maybe towards the end we will have some maybe we can ask everyone else what their conference don'ts are, because I always find it really interesting and you can pick up some really good tips. But I'm going to hand over to Zhuhua, who is an expert at conference networking and things, I think. So we'll hand over, and then after that we've got the Q&A. So please don't forget to, I can see there's lots of messages I've not got to in a second, but please add your questions. I'm making a list, and then we'll go through some of those, and hopefully we'll get some good answers for people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Can you see my PowerPoint on the screen? Okay, nodding, thank you. Great to meet everyone here. And as somebody commented in the chat, it's really truly international webinar with colleagues and friends joining us from all over the world. It's great. And thank you very much, Tim, for coordinating. My name is Zhuhua. I'm based in UCL, University College London, and in the UK. I'm currently sitting at home in London. I was BAO chair until last September. I'm also still on the executive committee as outgoing chair, but compared with the last 3 years, I have a bit more time to meet people now, because I don't really need to run the BAO EC on a daily basis now. My research area is very much in intercultural communication. Something we may have met in BAO conferences. I've seen Alex nodding, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of you in our BAO conference in Glasgow in September this year. Right, so Tim asked me to talk about networking, and I think some of the key things have already mentioned in the previous presentation by Glenn, Alex, and Tim. So I'm just really sort of focusing on the topic themes haven't really covered so far. So I'll start saying, I'll just show on this on the play mode. Okay, yeah. So since networking for some people may sound really scary, it's big word, or it may sound, you have to try very hard to get engaged. But for networking is essentially making connections with people and also engagement. They are slightly different things. If you can make connections, that's absolutely fine. That's networking. And if you can actually add engagement, engage with people so that you can actually make contact after the conference and remain connected after the conferences, that will be a bonus. And essentially, networking is really about finding your own comfortable and genuine way to connect with people. So don't really have to try very hard. You have to find a way to connect with people. And there are several reasons why we actually need to think about networking. And I think one thing, if COVID has taught, is actually how much we have missed in-person contact and in-person networking. Webinars like this is absolutely fine because you can actually meet other people. But what is missing is the in-person, that informal conversation, informal workplace learning. You may also have the experience, you find out quite a lot of information in the corridor, and we call it corridor conversation. These actually conferences provide fantastic opportunity for you to actually make these informal connections and carry out those conversations. The other thing why we actually talk about networking is actually stay updated. Being in professional circles, And so you can get informed about trends, people's interest in topics people are working on. I think Tim mentioned, and also Alex also mentioned, after presentation, you go and seek out making connections with these colleagues who are interested in your research. Second reason, building collaborations. I think these collaborations very often coming out that informal conversation that you have over a social event, and many academic professional communication collaboration start from casual networking conversations. And also, this is perhaps about networking up, and you will have a chance to speak to these people, potential mentors who can offer you some career advice, feedback, and support. So, and I think many of you may have other reasons that you think why networking in a conference is important. What's the added value of coming to the networks? Now, since there are things you can do to help with networking, so preparation. Before the conference, I would really recommend recharge your battery as much as you can, and coming to the conference feeling refreshed, and be ready to introduce yourself and your research concisely. And these actually thinking about, including a good preparation of your talk, or if you are giving a poster, thinking about, how do you actually present, give introduction to your research, your research area in a couple of seconds, or if you have a longer time, in 1 minute, so that it give people the idea of what you do, and that will help with making connection between you and your listener. And research program, I think the team mentioned preparation. Yes, research program, and have a good view. I mean, I think if people actually you're struggling with memorizing name, and you can actually have a look at the program before the conference and note down the names you have come across in your own research area, or the connections you want to make during the conferences. So that's actually pre-conferences and things you can do. During the conferences, and this is a major stage where you can actually network, and you can engage with those who attend your presentation. These actually people who are likely in the same area, and they show your interest in your presentation. So making connections with those people and asking them, what do they think of the talks, any suggestions they can give you. And the other, I would say, really sort of easy place to make connections, network, is poster session. Go to poster sessions, and where you will definitely find people who you can actually strike up some conversation. And that's actually because of the poster that also gave you some interesting topics to talk about it, right? So be active in the poster session. If you are giving poster, ideal to plan your to talk about your research. And if you're not, you can go and find people whose work you are interested in and making conversation. And making the most of the social events. So I know Bio Conference usually organize early career events. And if there is a student early career meetup, please go. And then also these other receptions and buffets where you, and then if you want to attend conference dinner, which is in some conferences is more structured. You have you are assigned to a table, that's also fine. You're sitting somebody, and then that's actually your secured spot for networking. Poster conference and follow up with contact. I think that's really important, and that's actually really add to engagement. You don't have to do every follow up with every single person you have come across in the conferences. So you only follow up with those you are interested to remain in contact, sharing the work or get to know their work a bit more. So this is what you can do to help with networking. Obviously, the middle bit is really important, be spontaneous during the conference and reach out and be active. There are other things, people, think about from my experience in do's and don'ts. Because networking is sort of a really, if you look at any visual image, it is about network. So it's a two-way, multi-way of conversation. So in order to conversation flow, we all have to actively contribute to conversation. It's very hard if you don't really talk very much about yourself, your own research interests, or you don't really show curiosity about what other people do. I found it's actually always fun finding out about what other people do, what they're interested in is fascinating, and getting to know people is really a fascinating part of conferences. And be an active listener, seek out connections and things you can actually use as a small talk, venue, how do you get to the venue, food, weather, it's a sort of really standard conversation for the UK conferences, and your own research interest and in life, in work, etc. So these are all small talk, good topic to start the conversation, and you build the conversation around these shared interests. And you may also use these other tactics and name dropping. If you know, for example, Glasgow is the venue where we're going to host our next BAL conferences. Do you know anybody from Glasgow, or have you any local connections? All these helpful to make this conversation flow. And if you are particularly worried about how you introduce yourself to some people you don't really know, you haven't really met before, having some icebreakers ready. For example, what do you think of the talk? Is a good one, So, and what brings you to your event? What do you do? What are you interested? Are these all good conversation, openers? And then that lead me to don'ts. I mean, things that perhaps you shouldn't try. One thing I would say, don't try too hard. Tim also mentioned, you need to actually look after yourself, mindful of, limitation of your social battery. Exactly, you need to be genuine, but don't try too hard, and don't overthink. Don't really think about, everything is, what you're going to do and what the consequences of you are not doing anything. Don't overthink. Just actually really enjoy and go with the flow. And really importantly, and I do feel, sometimes it's nice to come with your friends, come with people you know. If you come with your friends, be prepared to circulate a bit. You probably have come across a phrase people often use, oh, I need to circulate. That's exactly sort of a conversation, the things you need to do. Be open to engaging with others. Think about your body, your gestures, whether you are facing the room or you're back to the center. And that's actually give us people signal whether you want to engage with them, whether you like to be open to engaging with others. Now, I think it's important to realize it's not the end of the world if you hate networking at a conference. There are alternative networking strategies. For example, during the conferences, if you are sort of really hesitate to mingle in a group, you can request and ask people whether they have time for one-to-one session. And then if you, sort of plan ahead, and you can usually send email to secure time slot, particularly for a big conference, you can't really find people, by chance. You have to make appointments, so that give you the opportunity to do one-to-one networking. And also find a quiet space. Sometimes we struggle to hear people particularly when it's noisy places, and then there are so many distractions. You can ask, find a quiet space to have sort of a more engaged conversation. Alternative, digital networking, I put the question mark, is not for everyone. And sometimes people don't really use digital network that much. That's also okay. There are also different ways of networking. Digital networking, and I think Tim mentioned, the Blue Sky, LinkedIn seem to be the in thing. I haven't used LinkedIn for a long time until recently, and I realized LinkedIn seemed to sort of really people using LinkedIn more and more these days, and less so on Facebook anymore. So all these digital networking methods, if you find a way that work for you, and but at the end of the day, it's the quality of your work, expertise, and dedication that drives long-term success. It's not really networking help. It opens doors and help you to connect with people, but it is your work that actually make sort of really decide your long-term success. I think that's all I have to say about networking. Happy to answer any question, and I'm sure people joining on this call have many of tips and advice to give as well. So feel free to type in the chat things that have worked for you for networking or the poster presentation or coming to get your abstract accepted. So now I'm handing back to Tim. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of everyone for volunteering their time. I've picked up some useful things as well from you, so that's great. So I've been making a little bit of a list of questions, but we're actually like the other conference I should have mentioned is don't go over time, and we're actually ahead of time. So everyone's been a very good example of how to not go over time today. So we've got lots of time for Q&A. So if there's any more questions, like please keep dropping them in the chat, because I think sometimes getting your questions answered can be, sometimes it's even more beneficial than the talks. Yeah, I've got the questions written down. I've lost the order. I was going to try and keep them in order, but they're all over the place. So if you asked a question first and I'm not getting to yours first, please don't think I've forgotten it. I think I have all of them. So we had a question from Lucy, which was like, what are poster talks? Which is, a good question. And then I sort of wanted to ask everyone, like, what do you think of giving poster presentations? And like, if you have much experience of giving poster presentations. So Glenn, do you want to start off maybe by talking a bit about what a poster talk is, and then anyone who wants to chip in about what, like, their opinion on poster talks or their experiences?
Yeah, for those of you who haven't had the experience, you'll put up, they're literally large, like 1 meter size posters. There might be 40 or 50 boards around a room. Some conferences, you just wander around at lunchtime and look at the posters and chat to people casually. Sometimes it's a little bit more formal. The presenter may be expected to give a 2 or 3 minute summary. Sometimes you get a bit of a mixture. So it's essentially a set of where the person captures the research visually on a poster, and people wander around the room trying to chat about the work if the people are standing next to the poster. It varies.
Yeah, and I think these can be really good. And I think for postgraduate students, maybe especially, but I think they're just generally very good. I gave one of these at the conference in Belfast, and actually what I quite liked was I gave a kind of a presentation and also a poster presentation. And so in the presentation, I was filtering people, oh, come and see this. I mentioned it. So that's a nice thing. And often they can kind of be interlinked. But actually, I think I met a student who was at the BAL conference last year, and he'd given a poster presentation, and it was all about Bonnie Norton's work. And she came and she was like going through his poster with him. So he was like, I think he was the happiest presenter at the entire conference. So that was really nice to see. But I think they can be really really beneficial as a presenter if they're done well. Like if you have some proper time and people come and see you. The other tip I'd give about them maybe is like I always find it quite good to have some questions on the poster for people to, because sometimes it's a bit awkward. Like people will come up to your poster and then they'll just be reading it and you're just stood there kind of, I don't know if I should say anything. So if you have have some questions at the bottom and you can sort of frame them like, oh, you can ask me about blah, 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 or tell me what you think about blah, blah, blah. That's quite a nice way to start that conversation at the end. Sometimes people will just come up and chat to you without really reading the poster, or they'll ask you to talk them through it. But I think they're really nice, and I think they're really nice to sort of to go and see. And I think often there are more slots there for poster presentations than there are for like, presentations with a PowerPoint and everything. So sometimes this can be a good thing to apply for, or you can kind of apply for one of each. It can be good if you're worried about getting accepted, because they're just as valuable, and they can be really fun to give, and they can be very sort of interactive. Yeah, has anyone else got any thoughts or opinions about poster presentations?
I guess with some places they say if you don't have any results, or if you're very early in your project, it's better to have a poster. So it can be if you're just starting out and you're not sure, the poster can be a way to put out your early results, and then the more formal, the spoken presentation could be next year perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like conceptual stuff as well. If you want to have a conversation with people about something, I think that can be a good angle for it. Okay. Anyone else, or shall we move on to the next question? Okay, the next question was from Paul, and this was about visas. So I'm not sure if I know the answer to this one, but if you're applying for a conference, is it usually a work or leisure visa you'll get? I think this is often going to depend on the country you're applying to visit, right? So it's very hard to say, because sometimes they just have kind of one category for both. I guess technically it is sort of a work thing, but sometimes they will ask you to have a letter from the conference, and conferences are usually pretty willing to provide that. Has anyone else had a different experience with that? Oh, okay, we've got a link in the chat. Sorry. Oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah, talking about visa, I actually have experience applying for a visa for conference last year in Brighton. It is actually the business visit rather than the student or professional visa. So the business visit visa, and you do need to have the invitation letter from the conference, and you submit like letters from your employers as well, and bank accounts and all stuff like that. So yeah. Okay. There are a lot of things to organize for that.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good. And apply early, I guess, because so I've got like visas for like visiting conferences in China, like 2 days before I had to go. So I was very happy to get it just on time, but it got a bit scary towards the end. Okay. We also had a question about rail cards. So I guess I'm probably a train nerd, so I can take this one as well. So I think like if you're a full-time student, you can get a student rail card. I think often it will be it's like for people up to age 25, but it is also for full-time students of any age. If you're a part-time student like me, you can't. But there are a few other. There's one called a network rail card, which is for going into London and sort of near London, which is quite good, and one called a Two Together rail card, which is like the name. If you have two people, you can go together on that rail card, and you save a third. So I mean, I've used that one when I was living abroad. I came to the UK with my wife, and we took a train to Plymouth, which is my hometown, and back. And it was worth buying because it's £30 rail card. I think we saved £40 on one trip. So it was kind of worth doing it. And then we had a few other little trips around that we used it for. So if you're visiting the country, do look into it, because there are kind of a few workarounds. So yes, it'll be like Two Together, network rail card. But hopefully, like if you're a full-time student, the student rail card should work for you. But yeah, I'm not sure 100% sure about the actual application process, but I do know it's available. So definitely check that out, because it can be really expensive compared to some places to get a train around the UK. So if you look into that, it's good if you can kind of combine some of those benefits as well. Okay, we had a question from Constanza about LinkedIn and sort of, is it worth creating a LinkedIn? Is it just for conference going, or is it worth being on these networks? Does anyone want to take that? Glenn, you're a social media maven. Do you have anything to?
Yeah, well, I straight away said yes. I thought as long as
Okay.
you've got something, like somebody, when you're sitting next to somebody, they may say, "Oh, are you on Blue Sky or LinkedIn?" They could, depending on the age and country, they could be Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You just, I suppose, the more broad options you have, you may be able to say, "Oh, yeah, this is great." And if you don't have anything, you might just lose that connection. So have a broad set, perhaps.
Yeah. Actually, weirdly, I was surprised at the conference this year. I collected more WeChats than anything else because a lot of the Chinese students who are over, they found out I lived in China. That, oh, have you got WeChat? And then we just exchanged that, and so we didn't need anything else. So definitely check out what people have. And yeah, I mean, I think it's most useful to share the one where you post stuff and things, because otherwise you can just sort of be a connection without having anything else. Okay, and then we also had a question about business cards. I don't have a business card at the moment, actually. I think it's probably a bad of me. Does anyone else use these very often? Are they worth investing in, or maybe your university will give you some for free? Are these getting much use?
I don't have them, but I think it always comes across very professional when someone has them. And it also gives people the chance to decide how they want to contact you. So, usually they'll have like a link to your LinkedIn, but they'll also have a link to your institutional email address, and people can choose whatever medium they feel most comfortable with, which I think is not a bad idea.
I've probably skipped them for the last 7 or 8 years, but there's always somebody, you're trying to have a conversation and somebody gives you their card and you feel really guilty. I almost always wish I'd had some at some point. Maybe I need to start ordering mine.
Yeah, no, well, I'm going to get some now. I think that'll be my follow-up from this from this presentation. That's fantastic. Okay, super. All right. If anyone else has any questions, I had a couple of questions I prepared earlier. But if anyone else has any questions, I miss okay, this is a really good one. I don't know what it is. How to choose which sessions you want to go to. Obviously, sometimes it's going to be some that you're interested in, but sometimes you're going to be really exhausted. Does anyone have any ideas about this?
I don't know. I think it's I mean, personally, Tim, and I think you have the same thing. We work on the topic of English medium instruction, which currently is kind of placed everywhere in the individual presentations at BAL. I try to go to people who either work on the same broader topic or people who use a methodology that might be linked to mine. If I see that people are presenting on papers that are already published, I might not go to those and go to people presenting unpublished work. Because I can read the paper at another time as well. I usually do most of the presentations, but I like to, skip 1 or 2 a day to free up some brain space.
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, because some people are very good at like just being so sure. I don't know. I feel like I sometimes feel very exhausted at the end. Like some people are more easily exhausted by going to lots of conferences or conference talks than other people. So it's kind of a bit personal, because I do know some people who will just kind of go all day every day and just kind of make loads of notes and be fully in it. I can't do that. So I really get burnt out if I do this for too long. So I think it depends. It's also, if you're not sure, like usually this isn't a problem, but if you're trying to find stuff that you want to see, if you go to one presentation and you think that person's really knows their stuff, or they're kind of in the same area as you, it's actually a really nice kind of pre-prepared icebreaker question to kind of say, oh, what talks are you looking forward to this weekend, right? Because yeah, because if you can find out what the experts in your area are going to see, it's nice, and you can see them there again, and it's a good way to make a connection. Any other tips on that one?
The other thing I want to add is one of the I found not necessarily difficult, but the sort of diplomatic decision we have to make is actually on regarding which sessions we're going or not is what we're going to do with the sessions by your close colleagues and or your students or people you know in your smallish network. I think that's we have to be supportive, and then but also bear in mind there are also other sessions we need to be around. So if I can't really make to a particular session where I know students or a colleague will be nice for me to be there, I always actually let them know beforehand or afterwards, explaining particular why I can't really be that session. And people usually fine if you say, there is another session which I need to be there, or there is other things I actually need to attend to. But I think letting people know you are aware of this need, you need to be there to support them, but you can't really make it, is also very nice gesture for them to know they are supported, or you do notice they have a presentation in the conference.
Yeah, it's kind of that's part comes back to planning as well, right? Because you can't. It's much nicer to do that before their talk than kind of say, "Oh, when's your presentation?" And I've done this before, and I always feel bad after. It's like, "Oh, when's your presentation?" It's like, "Oh, it was 3 hours ago," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so disorganized," and I feel less supportive. So if you could be organized like that, that's a really good thing. Okay, we've got a really good question actually, and this is one that I was hoping would come up. So I haven't gone to a conference so far, and I'm a bit nervous for the Q&A session. Do you have any tips for the Q&A session? So Alex, I think this one might be for you a bit, but I think everyone might have some ideas about this.
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, the Q&A session is not something that you can succeed in or fail at. It's something for you to get the most out of. So if you look at it like it is completely distinct from an oral exam. There's no right way of going about it. Just you have to make sure that you get the most out of it, that you get the most material stuff, references, connections for you to work with in the future. If you think about it like that, I think it becomes a lot less daunting. What you can also do, especially if it is your first conference presentation, is do a trial round in your lab, in your institution, in your research group, and have people ask you some questions. If there are any obvious questions that are prompted by your presentation, if there are any gaps in your story, I think that will become apparent very quickly. And then I think as soon as you have your bases covered, other questions can just be additional and lead to further interesting discussions.
And I think the worst thing that can really, I have seen, not at BAL actually, but at conferences international, I have seen sort of really horrible questions, or the infamous kind of more of a comment than a question, and then someone goes on a bit of a rant. But to be honest, I've never seen that happen, and not everyone in the room go, "Oh, I really don't like that person," or kind of just roll their eyes or something like that. So I think that's probably like the worst kind of question you can get, and it's never going to reflect badly on you at all. And I mean, I think even I have seen it a few times. So people have kind of started what's obviously going to be a mini presentation after your presentation. And I've seen people kind of stop the person if you're confident enough. And to be honest, every time I've seen this, I kind of look around the room and everyone sort of looks like they want to clap them when they do that, because the Q&A is really it should be for interaction often, I think. And if someone wants to share their ideas, I think that's usually better for afterwards. So people aren't coming to conferences kind of oh, I can't wait to ruin some postgraduates weekend or anything like that. I think people are generally there because they want to learn from you and kind of to share ideas. Sometimes people are a bit sort of patronizing and want to just kind of steamroll their ideas through, but just keep in mind it doesn't reflect on you if someone does that. And yeah, maybe tell someone, okay, maybe we can, if it's more of a comment, maybe we can catch up after the talk or something like that. Can work.
Also, again, the reference slides, you can make as many of those reference slides as you want to. I remember that for the first couple of conferences that I went to, I had no idea what would be asked. So I would prepare for anything I could potentially think of. And I would go into the presentation with 20 reference slides. That might not be the best thing to do for your own mental health, but when when you do get questions, you don't feel unprepared. You have materials to work with. If you're a bit of a nervous presenter, you have, your supportive materials on the slides. So I would say, put all of the additional information about your analyses, about the methodological choices that you've made on a couple of very simple slides. Don't spend any time trying to make them look nice. You just have them there for the Q&A if necessary.
Yeah. Another thing people often do, I think maybe you can mention it because I think I've seen you do this, but I know Jim, who's my supervisor, does this as well. It's people sometimes present with their students if you both happen to be attending. Like, I mean, I think it's quite rare for people to say, "Oh, I'm going to go to this conference just for the sake of presenting with my student." But if they're going anyway, they'll often be very happy to kind of be down on the presentation with you. And often, not always, but often that relationship in the talk is you're going to give the talk, and if anyone asks a really horrible question, your supervisor is going to sort them out. So yeah, so that might be something to think about if your supervisor is attending the conference anyway. But you have to be a bit organized and kind of get in touch with them ahead of time and see if you can organize that. And I mean, often that's a good way of getting more people to come to your talk as well. Because, oh, I know that name. Like, this person's a professor of such and such. I will come and see this talk because I've heard of them. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone, really. But it can really, make you feel less nervous about scary questions or things like that.
I just want to add, I think framing is also very important. Just to reframe, whether this is actually very sort of a completed project or is ongoing project, or you only sharing some preliminary finding or mention your status, only started PhD first year. That will get lots of support from the audiences and will make people gentle with you. I think that's that's why I was thinking framing, having support from your supervisor if you can, are really important. Just for those first time conference goer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. We've got a question here about turning a presentation into a paper. So if it's not based on research but professional experience, is it worth writing a paper on? I think it depends, but I generally think yes, right? Like I think there are lots of different types of paper, and so if you're presenting from your own experience, I guess you might frame that slightly differently for a conference presentation than for an academic paper. But yeah, you might kind of frame it more as, oh, this is like an autoethnography rather than just a presentation. You can just kind of say, I'm going to tell you a bit about what I learned doing such and such. So yeah, I guess it really depends on the area and the topic and sort of exactly what you're doing. But generally, I think lots of different types of papers, presentations can be turned into papers. Has anyone else got any insights on?
I think it's also, I think it's also worth thinking about which journal, what's outlet you are thinking of publishing your paper. And for example, some journals have a teachers forum where you can actually share reflections, actually encourage to share your reflections with examples. Doesn't have to be systematic, really sort of a theoretical or conceptual piece, but examples can be used, anecdotal example can be used to support argument. That's also fine. So think about the outlet, and then you can actually have a good sense of what kind of a approach will work, whether it's actually building on your professional experience reflections or so that's all.
I'd say on that one, just also consider if you're a PhD student, there are PhD journals and special publications that are encouraging PhD students, PhD researchers, so you may be able to go focus on those type of publications.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think, really do check out the different paper types, because there's actually like quite a lot of variation. And I think sometimes the the idea of like the full paper, like the sort of 8,000 word with the methodology and everything. Sometimes this can be really hard to present on. Like Alex was saying, we had a conversation yesterday in advance of his talk, and I'll say, well, sometimes I'll see a presentation where people spend 15 minutes describing their methods and then like 2 minutes on their findings, and it's really hard to present that type of research unless you're very organized and focused. It can happen. So yes, I think the sort of paper that's maybe like the 4,000 or the 2,000 or the sort of conceptual piece can often make quite good conference presentations, and vice versa. So I think reflections are definitely good. Okay, we've got one more. So this was as a first-year PhD who's never been to a conference, how to find conferences. Is there a database? How would you go about finding ones to attend? Does anyone want to take this one, or shall I? So obviously, just come to BAL, but it is a very good conference. I think BAL's a really strong one. So okay. See you, Professor. So yeah, the other thing I think is maybe ask your supervisor like what conferences they go to, right? Because I assume they're in the similar area to you, or even if they're not, they might know what they should know the conferences they go to. Like I said, obviously we're going to plug BAL because it's a BAL event, but also like do look for specialized conferences. Like I'm going to this EMI conference this July, which is it's really nice because all of the presentations are going to be relevant to my interests and kind of my research, and everyone there is going to sort of hopefully my research will be relevant to most of them. So those types of presentations can be really nice. Yeah, I think and then someone's said the BAL mail is really good as well. So if you subscribe to BAL, and you should, because you can save you money with your conference presentation, but also like the email list there, people are constantly sharing events and things that are coming up. There's often like there's more to go to than I find I have time for sometimes, but yeah, there's a lot of things. So yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. Has anyone else got any other methods for finding these talks? Special interest groups, yeah, that's good.
I think also we talked about like the benefits of Blue Sky and LinkedIn. I think personally for me, it's how I've been informed about special issues, conferences sometimes before the actual call for paper goes out. So I would say like the informal networks are also really good at providing information.
Okay. Yeah, so that might actually be a good place to kind of wrap up by plugging the upcoming conference. So I'll drop a link in the chat. I mean, if you just type in BAL conference into Google, it's the first result. So yeah, so the next conference is in Glasgow in early September. I think the BAL conference is almost always in the first week of September-ish. So yeah, and so the call for papers is out now. We tried to kind of get this talk to be in advance of like the submission deadline. So so the submission deadline is March 31st. So you still have a bit of time to apply, and hopefully you can sort of use some of the tips from these sessions to successfully apply. So plenty of time to get your abstract ready. I've not started mine yet, so I need to get going as well on that. But yeah, so hopefully this will give you a bit of confidence to kind of do that. And if anyone's got any questions, feel free to give me an email if there's something that comes up afterwards, because I think that's kind of part of my job as postgraduate coordinator for BAL. This recording will be available. I'm not 100% sure what we're going to do with it or in what form, but it will be available somewhere. So keep an eye on the BAL Facebook group or the mailing list or however else you found this, and we'll try and get the word out when that's available. It should be like this week or next. All right. Well, thank you again, Glenn and Alex and Juhua, who had to head off. And yeah, it's been really insightful for me at least. So thank you, and thank you for everyone for coming and asking questions. Okay. Bye-bye.